Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. How's everybody doing?
Good. Amazing, apparently.
Good. It's okay. You can think about it.
Looks like it's Friday. So it's excellent.
Does. So I'm assuming everybody can hear us. Jordan, you might be on mute. So.
He's sitting in the dark.
Turn the lights off on Jordan.
Yeah.
Oh no.
This is what happens when you have a call at like 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon in Europe. So, hey, Jordan, how are you, sir?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. That's still an awesome backdrop between yours and Adrian's. Still some of the best backdrops for calls to date. So.
It is, right?
Awesome. Well, cool. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I think James will join us here in just a few minutes. So as promised, we've got an action-packed agenda. So Andrew will be out for the next few days. He's still on vacation at the beach. So I'm covering as the guest MC for today. And so we've got a couple updates. So first of all, Andy's going to take us through some of the work we've done on GitHub projects, which sounds like a small thing, but it is a big thing as we look to get more contribution into the project. So he's going to walk us through the latest organization of the board, but also show us some of the new good first issues and other things that the community can help with. Next, we've got a walkthrough of some of the server-side rendering work that's been posted as an issue. And so James is going to kind of walk us through his thinking on that. But really, in the spirit of these being grooming meetings in the past, want to use that as an opportunity to bring some feedback into that as well before we get started on that one. So James will join us, walk us through that. Then we're going to have a discussion on Venya UI. So I know there have been some questions in the Slack channel around some of the new work on the scaffolding, and so I want to make sure those are addressed, but also just a refresher from James on kind of what's changed and kind of what can be done on that based on some of the organization that's happened there. Then, if that's not enough, a demo. Jimmy's going to walk us through some of the I believe the left drawer work that he's been working on with Peregrine. Probably towards the end there, and at the very end, we'll of course have Q&A and and open items as people would like to share. So, how does that sound?
Sounds
All
good
right.
to me.
Hey, folks. Sorry I'm late.
No worries.
So probably some worries for a short time.
No, it's fine. James, we're getting rolling here. So Andy's going to walk us through the projects here, and then we'll do the walkthrough of the server-side rendering and the Venya UI piece from you shortly after that.
Excellent.
Cool. Oh, Vladimir's on the line. But I'll walk through it, Vladimir, and then if you want to chime in, feel free. So here, following our move to the Magento organization, the repo move, here we're in Magento PWA Studio. There is a new projects tab, and this is kind of our new board, so that community can follow along. And we run through this at stand up every morning, so we're all working off the same thing. We're trying to move away from ZenHub and make things a little more public. So I'll kind of walk through the two boards, and this should be consistent with other Magento open source repos. So bouncing between them and PWA Studio should be pretty seamless. So here's the backlog. There's the description there was like that tracks issues. So these are all issues. Here's every new issue that gets opened up. Kind of falls in this ready for grooming, and then we go through these and decide which ones are valid, and we'll close duplicates and all that kind of stuff. So that's your traditional kind of backlog. Ready for development. These are in priority order, so we'll be pulling from the top. That would be the most important thing to work on. But yeah, that's ready for development. And then, as Eric pointed out earlier, we do have this we kind of separated out these good first issues for community to pick up. Anyone new to the project, these are kind of pretty simple, pretty straightforward, pretty easy, good first issues. So then once somebody picks up one of these, it's as easy. We should probably talk about our contributing process and how we assign things to people. But for now, if you get assigned to an issue, it'll pop over here to dev in progress, and that means that you're actively working on it. And then once you throw up a pull request, it'll end up in this pull request in progress column, and that's where the other board comes in. That's kind of your far out view, zoomed out view of things. So once there's a pull request, this board over here tracks the progress of pull requests. So it'll sometimes if you put up like a draft PR, we're still working on this work in progress column. It could show up here, but then once it's ready for review, the aptly named ready for review column, once one of us or someone else potentially picks it up for review, it'll pop over to this review in progress column. There's a couple columns for like the state of the PR, so if there's changes requested or something's on hold or it's been approved. Once it's approved, there's kind of this ready for QA, like reviewer approved and ready for QA are kind of synonymous here. So then there's another column for when QA is in progress on it, and then the PR is kind of considered done. So if we pop back to this other board here, so that would be the end of pull requests journey. And then so once it's done, the issue will show up here ready for production. And then once we do a release, we'll kind of flush this column, and things will move over to the release column. So these are all the things that are done and merged into develop, but not
closed too.
but haven't been part of. Sorry, say that again.
It's also just for closed issues.
Yeah, we'll have to fix that. But yeah, so things that have been merged to develop but haven't been released as part of an official release yet. So that'll be an easy way to be able to tell the difference between those two things, which is nice. But that's pretty much it for the board. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Vladimir?
No, I think now it's almost clear. Just for first column, work in progress. Currently, it doesn't work with draft pull request, but we already can put the VIP three letters to the title of the pull request, and the pull request will automatically move to this column. So it's a little bit another approach than GitHub provide, but we also can use this column.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yep. And I think one of the biggest reasons why we're trying to do this is to be consistent with the community engineering projects. And so you've got Volodymyr on the team from Max's organization. We've got quite a few contribution days that are coming up. And so we want to shore up our work so that people can start to contribute. And especially if they're already familiar with one project, they'll be familiar with all. And so we wanted to work a little bit closer that way, which also explains part of the reason why we moved to the Magento org. So for that, it's really about ease of use and being able to jump in and make an immediate contribution. So thank you so much for all the work behind that. Just wanted to walk through this, especially for folks who are less familiar.
Along those lines, real quick, PWA Studio is now a featured repository in the Magento organization. Boom! Right up
nice,
top middle, right there.
Looking nice. Not that Git stars are the most important thing in the universe, but we're up about 10% since we moved over to
really
organization progress.
Nice.
Who's counting, right?
Oh.
All right. So that's it. That's it for that. Any questions on our move to GitHub projects before we switch gears to James? All right. So James, let's talk a little bit about some of the server-side rendering improvements that are coming by way with 1529, and let's do a Q&A and maybe a walkthrough again on some of the Venya UI work that we've seen some questions this week.
Did we lose James?
Speechless.
And unmuted.
There he is.
And unmuted. I would be happy to do that. Thank you, Eric.
Sure.
And I want to reiterate that nobody laugh at me. That was perfectly timed. And I want to reiterate that we are going to do a lot of contribution soliciting in the coming fall season. Fall's always a little bit busier. Autumn. The Munich contribution day that I'm going to be personally attending is nicely centrally located in the middle of Europe, so it might be nice pickings for y'all. And in light of our sort of busier schedule in the autumn and the excitement that we have towards a few new feature concepts and a few new initiatives in PWA Studio, we're trying to open and tag more issues that are ready for contribution or for suggestion or even just guidance and argument from folks in the community. The one that I'm the most interested in right now is one that I opened because I only care about me things. And that's a ticket to add static compiled server-side rendering to Venia. I spoke about this in a previous community sync, and that was kind of in the middle of showing off a bunch of code. I'd like this to be a simpler and quicker message. We don't need to do complicated server-side rendering for almost any cases with PWA Studio. Venia can render from a completely static, pre-generated HTML document. It will be easier to understand, and our experiments are showing, other people's experiments are showing, that it will probably feel faster. So this doesn't mean we get rid of upward SSR. There are other cases where it's important, and so you need to have an SSR concept. You need to have a server-side rendering capability in the stack. It might turn out to be insufficient for some purpose we need in the future. So we're prepared to accept that and maybe add something to the concept. But for now, it's looking like the sort of very simple, basic server-side render that Upward can do out of the box is about as much server-side render as you need. And for most cases, for your phone, for your browser, for basically anything that's not a search marketing bot, we're going to try to do fully static compiled server-side render. And there are a number of different ways to go about that. In our custom architecture, we could try to simplify Upward to make that happen. There are also some off-the-shelf solutions for Webpack that are possible. Rather than me disappearing for 2 weeks and making something and then demanding that everybody understand it, I wanted to invite folks from our community to contribute to this or to make arguments for or against it. And that's why we opened this ticket. The things that I have just explained to you are kind of laid out here. SSR may not be necessary for most renders. And I wanted to briefly show off one of the most popular plugins in the Webpack ecosystem, one that is part of the Create React app workflow, most Webpack-based scaffolding projects, and has probably the largest plugin ecosystem within a plugin that exists in the Webpack world. And that's the HTML Webpack plugin. What this does is it helps you to create an HTML file as one of your generated Webpack assets. And almost always, that means that you're generating a file to be used as an application shell, an index.html that your browser receives that helps it to load the JavaScript app. The HTML Webpack plugin has just countless features. You shouldn't use all of them. It can get too complicated, and the whole point of this is to make it simpler. But the key difference is that instead of waiting for a request to come in to lazily create an HTML document, waiting for GraphQL to come back, etc., we would like to try not bothering to do any back-end work for just sending out an HTML document. So all the document would need would be to have hard-coded links to the JavaScript asset files that are necessary. So with the asset manifest plugin that we have and with the other parts of the BuildPack and Webpack ecosystem, this is a perfect candidate for generating the type of HTML file that we're talking about. Lots of capabilities, lots of concepts, and really extensive documentation. So this is the place where I would suggest that you get started. And now that there is a single place for PWA Studio's library code to include changes to the Webpack configuration, I feel comfortable saying there's a place where you can contribute work that would be used by many, many other folks. It used to be that everyone out there who's doing a project has copied the Venia directory to some extent, and they've probably made some changes to this big Webpack config file that lives in Venia. Well, that file is small now. And where you would implement the HTML Webpack plugin, if you're doing it for your individual project, you might do it in Webpack config. But if you're here on this call and you want to contribute to the core code base, then there is now a place here in BuildPack in our configure webpack function. This is where we do all the stuff that an off-the-shelf project might do in webpack-config.js. Here's where you might do something like adding the HTML webpack plugin to the recipe that we have set up here. I would really be interested in folks developing experiments towards this. There are some people on the call who I would completely trust with developing that from scratch if they want to. And I think that is the next logical step for improving our performance story. So that's just the summary. I intended to make it that short at first, but it is a large topic and probably something that I could answer more questions on if you guys need clarification. Bottom line is, this is just an exploration story, a research spike, and we'd like to invite folks in the community to be part of our own research efforts. That's what I got. I know that there's some other recent changes, including the migration of the Venia UI library that we can talk about, but I'd like to break for a minute to see if anyone has questions, contributions, vehement disagreements. No, all right then. Okay, the other thing I want to point out is that we recently merged a major change to the organization of the code base. There is now a Venia UI directory which contains almost all of the stuff that used to be in Venia concept. So the vast majority of the code, including component code, Redux code, this all lives in another package called Venia UI. That's intentional because Venia UI is supposed to be a library for other applications to include. And Venia concept is the perfect example of an application that takes the UI library and then renders it into a web page and then builds a document. So it's Webpack that builds that document. Venia concept is the place that connects Venia UI to BuildPack to produce a finished progressive web app. If you are working on a code project right now that you branched before we made this change, you might worry that this is going to make your merge impossible. I promise it's not so. It's not going to be that hard. There may be some difficulty. You may want to make sure that you do merges carefully, and we'll try to help you with that when we can. But the bottom line is, it's not going to be that bad. Git understands when you have moved a file, and if you make a change to that file and then try to merge in a move of that file, Git should do the right thing. Fortunately, and I'm loading up the PR so that you can see this, fortunately, you might see that Git is aware that we didn't just like delete a directory and create a new directory, that we actually copied files, and you can see that Git understands that, and GitHub does too. So go forward with confidence and continue to merge, develop into your open work. It should work just fine. That's the only other piece of news that I have. I'm gonna stop sharing. Questions, concerns, vehement disagreements.
We have a shy group this Friday, so I know there were some questions online, and I also know that we'll have as many as 100 people view the recorded version of this, and so hopefully this clarifies. But of course, if there's anything we can address afterwards, we can certainly do so.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. In the meantime, you're just reinforcing my belief that no one ever disagrees with me.
I actually agree with it. At first, I was a bit skeptical about the change, but then I tried to implement Gatsby, and it just made sense because it's so much easier to implement relative paths compared to the source resolving directory. So yeah, it's a good change after all, in my opinion.
Good, yeah, and Gatsby is a great point of reference for us. We've been guided by a lot of the choices that they've made. We've spoken to their creators too, actually, early on in the project, to Kyle and Sam. So they do some good stuff.
In San Francisco.
Yeah, they do some good stuff. And in their initial concept of Gatsby, it was a static site generator. So this is exactly in keeping with that, and we can reach the performance that they're so well known for.
Yeah, we had a really interesting Gatsby demo using Studio a couple months ago from Stan and the Shipper HQ team. So maybe some
yes, that was so cool.
there. It was really cool. So, all right, well, very good. Well, thank you, sir. So let's switch gears and show a little demo. We've got Jimmy had mentioned that there's some left drawer progress here worth worth sharing. We've been working pretty hard on that, and I think it'd be a great time to show it and get some feedback.
Cool. Yeah, I'll boot it up here. All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Cool. So yeah, I've been working for a while on a number of different concepts for a next round of improvements to the app, particularly trying to explore how to clean up the way that we keep state and the way that we pass state down the tree, and also in looking at how to flesh out Peregrine, we've been exploring how we want to move some of the app state into Peregrine so that it can serve its role as sort of a keeper of logic. And exploring all that stuff seemed to come together into the left drawer, seemed like a good place because it's kind of a deep tree, right? It's sort of an app within an app. It's a routable, it's got different views within sort of a modal view in that left drawer. So what I've done here is reworked how state for navigation is kept, and then reorganized the views into a header, the category tree, an authentication bar, and an authentication modal with all of the subflows within it: create account, forgot password, my account, and sign in. And now keeping that state much as possible, the view state within the views, and then the logic is still within a reducer. And we can come take a quick look at what that's like before we look at the code too much more. So, like before, sign-in is going to bring you to the authentication modal for the first time. That's here. And from here, we can enter the forgot password flow or the create account flow, or we can go ahead and sign in. And that'll bring us to my account page. And then there's another change in here, which is where this branch initially began, which actually is going to alter the category tree here to expose all of the categories. For the first time, you can now actually look at more than just a few top-level categories. You can actually come in here and look at belts, for example. This is made possible by some of the new GraphQL features that were added since we first wrote this component over a year ago.
Nice.
We're still waiting on one more addition to GraphQL that will allow us to understand the child count before we click in to a category. So that's why you see a slight flash there as it performs the query to figure out whether Belt has any child categories. But once we're able to fetch basically children of children, then this will be even more seamless than it is. But for right now, the big improvement here is that we're no longer hiding half the categories within the list. So from a UI perspective, we cleaned up some things in the account flow, got rid of a bunch of some of our oldest code there. But more importantly, something that you'll see if you look in the container and in the subflows here, such as the auth modal, is that the app state that is available from Redux and that is still held in Redux here at the moment is being threaded through context. So if you've been paying attention to the project, you've probably seen quite a bit that we are using React context pretty extensively, maybe compared to other apps that you've seen. Context is the best way to take state that lives up high and make it available to the app at any level down below the tree without having to thread it through every step along the way. This is going to be particularly powerful for extensions which don't have control necessarily over the entire tree, right? So if you wanted to change something at the bottom of the left drawer, you would have to change the navigation and every view in between normally. But if we can provide app state via context, then you can just change whatever you want at the bottom of the tree and tap into that app state, sort of like connecting in Redux, but without the performance penalty. So what we've done here in the navigation as sort of a intermediate step here is pulled the state and the bound action creators out of Redux with the standard map state and map dispatch, and created some context objects, and then basically similar to the hooks you've seen us create before, create state and API for each of these. So an app state and an app API, which contains those bound actions, a catalog state and a catalog API, which contains those actions, and similar for the user. And then outside of the navigation component, we're rendering context providers with that state and API, state and API, state and API here. And this proves out the concept without quite overhauling everything yet. But what you can see is that this pattern can work for the app. And so when we're ready, we can do this context providing at the root. And we can provide all of the actions that are associated with app and with user and with catalog. And so the components underneath here, the navigation and everything down below, will still just use they'll just use a context. They won't know that these providers have been lifted up to the top. So it should be a smooth transition there. So basically, this is a preview of things to come for the entire app, all contained within the left drawer. So give it a whirl, see what you think. Try and get accustomed to the patterns there, because we're going to be bringing that to the right drawer and then ultimately to the rest of the app, I think.
Nice. Cool.
All right, that's what I got.
Very good. Thank you, Jimmy. So any questions from the audience? Any comments? Speechless.
Jimmy, do you think in the scope of this PR you're going to keep those context connections in that container, or are you going to try and hook them up to the rest of the app, like some of the other stuff we've done, like Toast context?
That's still a call we can make. It doesn't matter too much for the current implementation. It's just a question of whether we want to avoid the churn or not. Yeah. Whether it's better to go for the bigger change now to avoid churn, or just to go for the smaller change now and be prepared to make the bigger one in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I see it as a good intermediate step, especially for like that Spike PR we have open right now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Great. Makes sense. Well, that is the end of the agenda. Were there any other topics, any other questions from the team? All right. Well, very good. Well, thank you so much for everybody's help. Lots of great progress. For those who are following the history, we've done some great work. Thanks to folks like Nicholas and others who've gotten some PRs committed in this week's progress. We also upgraded to 16.9 of React, which is pretty exciting for that. So definitely take a look at that. As always, if there's any questions, you know where to find us. But again, thank you so much for everything. And as Andrew would say, onward and upward. So very good. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Right.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.